What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us here for a special Wednesday edition of Fantasy MLB Today. We are a Sports Ethos presentation, of course, and I'm your host, Joe Orico. You can find me over on Twitter at Joe Orico99, and you can check out all of our fantasy baseball content here at Ethos Fantasy BB, whether it's podcasts, articles, news and notes, updates to the site. You guys can check it all out there on Twitter at Ethos Fantasy BB. And if you're not somebody who uses Twitter or social media, sportsethos.com, you'll get all that same great stuff right from the source. Today, we're doing another team preview. If you guys missed it yesterday, we had Chris Clegg on. We were talking Atlanta Braves. Today, we are joined by Ben Palmer. If you're not familiar with Ben Palmer, he is a senior writer over at PitcherList. You can check him out over on Twitter at Ben J. Palmer. First time on the show. Ben, it's great to get the chance to talk with you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I will always take the opportunity to talk about the Orioles.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one talking about the Orioles. They had one of the more surprising seasons last year, I think. They dominated. They came out on top in the American League. Not in the American League, but they were, I think, in the regular season. Wasn't Baltimore the best American League team last year, record-wise?
Yeah.
They were.
Yeah, they were.
And I don't know how many people were really expecting that. We're going to get into everything Baltimore Orioles in a second, but I do want to give you a chance, Ben, to just let everybody know about what it is you do over at PitcherList, any work you got going on that you'd like to plug here before we get going.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I'm one of the senior writers over at PitcherList. I've been there for ever, since 2016, I think. I do, during the season, I do a weekly column of hitters you can stream for the upcoming week. This off season, in fact, probably within the next few weeks, I'll be starting my pitch review series where I look back at the best pitches of each pitch type. And also looking back at the pitches that had the highest chase rates and, all that kind of stuff, the best overall pitches of each different type. So I'll be doing that as well. And I also write about the Orioles every now and then for a Baltimore sports blog called Baltimore Sports and Life. That's where it's my more niche, like ranting about the Orioles stuff is.
Yeah, make sure you guys are checking out Ben's work. He does great stuff. Obviously, anything PitcherList related is worth checking out. And PitchCon's coming up in a few weeks.
It is
like the last week,
a couple weeks.
Last week of January, I think. I signed up yesterday. Going to be great to be back on there again. I'm sure you'll be doing something, Ben, as well. And always a great cause to donate at PitchCon. So make sure you guys are on the lookout there. But let's get into the meat and potatoes. Let's talk Baltimore Orioles. We're going to be using Fangraphs roster resource as kind of our template here. It's not perfect. We're still January. I'm not sure if this is what the lineup and everything will end up looking like, but it's a good base to go off of here. And we're going to start at the top like we usually do. And generally speaking, we're talking about the best player on any roster when we're starting at the top. It's not always the way it works, but so far we've done the Braves and we've done the Arizona Diamondbacks, and we've talked Corbin Carroll and Ronald Acuna Jr. off the top, and I think we're probably getting the best player out of the way here with the Orioles as well, and that's Gunnar Henderson. Gunnar Henderson coming off of a very impressive rookie year, 28 homers, 10 steals, and a .255 batting average. He also scored 100 runs, drove in 82. Now, he's expensive. If you want to get into the Gunnar Henderson business this year, it's costing you, at this point, a second-round pick in NFBC drafts. Generally speaking, I think sometimes you're getting him maybe in the third, but the ADP of 29.5 is expensive. What are your thoughts on Gunnar Henderson as a whole? Do you think that we can see some improvement this year? Are you willing to pay that second-round ADP?
I think second round is that's a little pricey, but I probably would. I think Gunnar's skills are legit. I mean, if you look at at PitcherList, our PLV, which is our pitch level value, it's sort of like Saris's Stuff Plus. We have hitter level PLV, and it shows that Gunnar is above average at both his contact ability and power. So he is just generally, as a all-around hitter, he's better than average. The plate discipline is slightly concerning to me. He had that .255 average, came with a .245 expected average. Slightly below average strikeout rate. His walk rate's okay. Another thing our PLV shows is aggression, which is exactly what it sounds like, how aggressive the hitter is on certain pitches. And Gunnar got a lot more aggressive as the season went on. So that's just something to keep an eye on. Play discipline among guys as young as Gunnar is always a thing. But the nice thing is the skills are legit. He's going to be hitting probably at the top of a very good lineup. The counting stats will be there. Hopefully, a decent number of steals will be there. And I think, the power is just going to get better. So, yeah, I mean, it's crazy to think the guy is he's what, 21, 22? Yeah, he's 22. So, I mean, you can only imagine he will probably get better. So, second round's probably the top end of the price I'd be willing to pay, but I think it makes sense, just given the fantasy production all around. He might hurt you a little bit in average. I don't have much faith that the average is going to go up. I hope so. I would love that. But I don't think he's going to suddenly be like a 270 or 280 hitter while, doing all the other stuff. But everything else, I mean, he's an all-around contributor. So, yeah, he's great.
I believe in the skills. I just can't get behind the price, really, especially when he's going in the same range as Pete Alonso, Marcus Semien, Luis Robert. If you want to go for a pitcher in that range, you're getting Kevin Gausman, Luis Castillo, maybe Zach Wheeler. I just think it's a really deep area. And I think Gunnar was about the 55th or so ranked player last year, according to Razzball. We're expecting an exponential increase, essentially, to be drafting him at this price. And I think everything was kind of like a perfect storm for Baltimore last year. And I think that everything would need to go really, really right for him to be a top 25 player this year. I think just based on the batting average where it is, I think he needs a near perfect storm to go like 30 homers, 15 stolen bases. He gets the batting average up a little bit. He's able to maintain the runs. I think there's a lot of ifs for me in the second round. If he was going in the third or the fourth round, then I'd be taking him every day. I just think that he's been priced out a little bit for me. And that's why I'm looking forward to seeing Yahoo open up their player boards and CBS and ESPN everywhere, so we can maybe get him at a cheaper price, because NFBC is kind of all we have to go on right now. I'm not sure if there's a little bit, maybe, people will push up players in NFBC drafts, whether it's a Tariq Skubal we've talked about on the show, Nolan Jones. People are pushing up those high upside guys, and I don't know if you're going to see that necessarily in every single draft, but if you're talking NFBC, you're not getting him likely outside of that latest, like middle of the third round. And I think that's just a little bit too expensive for me personally. As much as I love Gunnar, I think he's just been priced out of my range at this point.
Yeah, I think you're buying high. I mean, you're at that price, you're not giving yourself any room for failure, because unless Gunnar basically hits his ceiling, I mean, obviously his ceiling is like, a first round incredible. Yeah. But, unless he hits his reasonable ceiling for next year, then, second round's too expensive. So I think, third or fourth round probably makes more sense, because it gives you, it accounts for risk in a way that I don't think a second round pick does.
No, he needs to smash, essentially, to even give you just a neutral return on your investment. If he finishes as the 35th, 40th overall player, you're not going to be disappointed necessarily. You probably won't, but he needs everything to go right. And maybe it will, but I don't really want to be finding out in round two. Projected about second, Adley Rutschman, who built off of his debut season, cut the strikeout rate. The walks remained about the same. Increased the batting average, had 20 home runs, 84 runs, scored 80 driven in. It was a very, very good season. Obviously, he is going to be on the field more, or at least as much as any other catcher that you're going to be finding in the player pool. He's a 5-win player now in each of his last 2 seasons by WAR. He is probably the best catcher in baseball, real-life baseball. In terms of fantasy, is he the number 1 catcher for you? I'm not sure if you've put together any kind of catcher rankings at this point, but is he your number 1 guy off the board at the backstop position this year?
I think there's a really strong argument to be made for it. He's, got the elite plate discipline. I think he's going to continue to get better. I would love to see a slight bump in power, which that would be really cool. I mean, last year he had a hard contact rate around 27.6%, which is around league average. But what is interesting is his ideal plate appearance rate. So that's barrels plus solid contact plus flares and burners. These are all the StatCast things divided by plate appearances. It was 30.4%, which was 31st in all of Major League Baseball. So he's hitting the ball hard and he's making like quality contact. I'd love to see some of that IPA rate maybe translate into a few more home runs. It's a little tricky sometimes in Camden Yards with, the Great Wall of Camden out in left field, sapping home runs and I mean, Adley most of the time is going to be batting from the left side anyways, but I think you can expect to have for him to have the exact same season pretty much as he had last year. High batting average, good power, good counting stats. And if the power goes up a little bit and he starts hitting like 25 home runs or something like that instead of 20, that would make him even better. So yeah, I think there's a strong argument to be made for him to be the #1 overall catcher for sure.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I'm going to end up. I've toyed with maybe Will Smith, maybe William Contreras, but I think it's Rutschman.
Yeah.
You're getting that certainty of plate appearances. He's obviously a game manager behind the plate. He's excellent defensively. He's not going to be somebody that they're going to be putting on the bench very often. 154 games from your catcher, probably about as much as you can hope for. You're going on like 700 plate appearances there. Now, his price is expensive. NFBC, 2-catcher leagues, people are going to push up catchers. And the way I kind of, relate it to people who are not familiar with the NFBC is like Superflex fantasy football league, right? When you need 2 quarterbacks, people are going to be pushing up those quarterbacks because they're, you need to fill 2 of them on your roster. And I think that's where we are with Adley at 52 on the ADP number. If you guys are drafting like most of you will on CBS or Yahoo, I don't think you're going to have to pay 52. I think that's probably inflated because you need 2 catchers. But I don't have any problem with him, back end of the top 100, in that kind of range. I don't know if I'd want him at 52 in a 1-catcher league. I think that's probably pushing him too much.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
But I think where he is right now in 2-catcher leagues, it really does make sense. I think that team is generally going to get a little bit better. They might not improve win total wise from last year, but I think overall you're going to see some improvements from these individual players on the roster. And I think that we'll probably be able to meet like a top 75 price for Adley. You don't probably need to be paying that price though once you are talking about like your standard Yahoo league. So just something to keep in mind there. We're talking about this ADP. It's not something that you're probably going to have to pay most of the time, but I'm a big fan. It's hard to not like what Adley Rutschman is able to do for you, especially just based on the volume at catcher. You don't really see that from a lot of guys.
They DH him a good bit. So I think which is great. They'll keep, they'll put James McCann in at catcher and let Adley DH. So he's going to get volume. And and they need him out there because he's maybe their best offensive player. Yeah. So he's going to get a lot of at bats. Which is great. You don't, like you said, you don't always get that volume from your catcher.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving down the order to number 3, we got Anthony Santander. This is, of course, the projected lineup. I think he's probably a good bet to bat third. He started off this past season terribly. I had a lot of people were sending quite like, should I drop Anthony Santander in the first month? And it was hard to hold on, really. He had 2 home runs. He was batting .213. And then in May, 7 homers, batted .337. And he did kind of pick it up the pace over the course of the season, ending up with 28 homers, 95 driven in, a .257 batting average. You got interest in Santander this year? He feels like a pretty stable kind of profile where you can kind of expect generally the same thing from him every year. You're getting 25, 30 homers, .250-ish batting average. Are you interested, especially considering the price right now, which is about $140? Are you interested in Santander this year?
Yeah, I think he kind of is what he is at this point. Like you know what you're going to get with Santander, which is he's going to hit in like the 250s, good counting stats, maybe around 30-ish home runs or so. Plate discipline's always been an issue with him. He's got a slightly worse than average strikeout rate. Walk rate is okay. There's a lot of there is value to be had from Santander. I haven't heard any rumors about this, but this is just me thinking. Wouldn't shock me if he ends up as a trade chip if the Orioles are trying to make a trade because he's got 1 year of arbitration left. And then that's it. And I don't think, with all of the prospects the Orioles have, I don't anticipate that they're going to be re-signing Santander to a longer-term deal or anything like that. So wouldn't shock me if, along with a prospect or two, if some team wants to move a ace-level pitcher that the Orioles are looking for, and, they want someone like Santander, wouldn't shock me if he ends up moving. But I haven't heard any rumblings that that's actually going to happen. But from a fantasy perspective, yeah, I think there's use for Santander. I think what we saw out of him last year is legit. I think he's going to be streaky. Like, he was really bad at the beginning of the season. That's just kind of what he does. Like, he's going to have 2 months or a month where he is awful, and then he's going to have 2 months where he's hitting like 375 and hitting a home run every other day. And it's going to keep happening. That's just kind of who he is. But if you can stomach the hot and cold and perhaps, have your roster constructed in a way where you have the flexibility to sort of bench him when he's cold and then start him when he's hot, yeah, I think he definitely can be useful.
Yeah, I think overall you're still going to get averaging out to what we've seen the last couple of years. It might be tough at times, but if you hold on like last year, if you held on to him, you got rewarded as opposed to dropping him early. And I think that's something that, it's probably a question we're going to both get this year at some point. Is Anthony Santander a drop? It's probably worth it to hang on in the long run, considering especially if he's a number 3 hitter in this lineup. It's hard to not see him having at least some fantasy relevance, right? Like I don't think that he's going to be somebody who smashes, who goes, ends up as a top 50 player or something. That's just not really realistic. But I think that he's going to be somebody that should be able to remain on your roster all year. Kind of a boring-ish fantasy player, but somebody that will still give you decent production, I think, especially if he's able to steal a few bags like last year. He stole 5 bases. If he's able to do that again, you'll take it, right? It's not a huge number, but a non-zero is still a non-zero at that point. I think you'll take that if you're getting that in round 9 or round 10. This is where the lineup starts to get really interesting, though, for me, at least in terms of the projections. According to Roster Resource right now, they got Ryan O'Hearn in the 4-hole. Now, he had an excellent season last year. 14 homers, 60 RBIs. He batted .289, which was a huge surprise to me and I think everybody. I don't really see him doing it again, though. I think this was kind of just a random good stretch. He's a .237 career hitter. He's not somebody that has a hell of a lot of power. I don't see him batting 4th in the order, and I don't see him having that kind of fantasy relevance again. What do you think on Ryan O'Hearn?
I think, huge surprise. It was really cool to see him do as well as he did. It wouldn't surprise me if he ends up in the exact same role as last year, which was basically, up against right-handed hitters only. And he allowed Mountcastle to DH or rest every now and then. I do think some regression would happen. I mean, he had a 340 BABIP and a 248 expected batting average. So, those kind of suggest that like 289 is probably not going to happen. He's a guy. He's also honestly, and speaking of, like Santander as a trade chip, he also could be someone that, if he's basically house money, they got him for nothing. And, Mountcastle's the full-time first baseman. Urias can play first base if needed. And, easy to forget that Lewin Diaz is in AAA and had a halfway decent season as a first baseman last year. So if in trade talks, some teams like, hey, we really want some left-handed hitting first baseman, and they're like, hey, we kind of believe in what O'Hearn did. I don't know. It wouldn't shock me, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think for fantasy purposes, he's useful in deeper leagues. Like I had him in a dynasty league where I have pretty big rosters, 40-man rosters. So, you have the flexibility to play him when he's going up against righties and bench him when he isn't. But for standard fantasy leagues, I don't really think there's going to be much use there. His playing time not going to be consistent enough because he will never start against lefties at all.
Yeah.
So, and I do think some of that regression is going to happen.
I could see him being somebody that you take in like a draft champions if you're doing one of those, and he could have some value. You're getting some later plate appearances. He's not expensive. That's the good thing. If you did believe in what we're seeing as well, he's projected as the 4 hitter. If you do want to buy into that, which I would advise caution, but 414 is the ADP. He's not somebody you have to pay up for at all. He's not somebody that's even going to be drafted probably in those standard size leagues. If you are in a draft and hold of some kind and you're able to get him 450, 500, maybe he gets 100 at bats, maybe he gets 100 games played again. And the projections are good. If he meets the projections, 17 homers, 60 RBI, 3 stolen bases. At that point of the draft, I think that it can have value, but I also don't know how much I really want to buy into the projections. I think that they might be overestimating what he can do. And I think that you're spot on with the trade thing. If he starts off even 80% of what he did last year, they should try and ship him out because I don't think the true talent is actually, close to a 290 hitter who's going to pace out to 25, 30 homers. It's just not who he is. So I think it's a good call there. I think they should probably have already made a trade. Last year I did a trade deadline show and we were talking pretty much the whole show about they should trade some prospects for Dylan Cease. They should do something. They should trade something for a starting pitcher. There are going to be some trades coming, I think, with this team. So it might not look exactly the way it's currently constructed right now. Moving on to number 5, projected to bat number 5 is Austin Hayes. Austin Hayes at one point last year was competing for the batting title. He did fall off in the second half of the season to some extent, and he still gave you pretty good numbers. 275 average, 16 homers, 5 stolen bases. Another guy who wasn't expensive, but he's a big reason why the Orioles were as successful as they were last year. Guys like him, guys like O'Hearn, just kind of not coming out of nowhere, but giving you a really solid season when you maybe weren't expecting it. Do you think that Austin Hayes is more of the guy we saw in the first half last year? And the first half, Austin Hayes was a 314 hitter, decent power. Second half, power fell off a little bit, only a 227 hitter. Where do you think he is closer to in terms of those two ranges?
Yeah, I think he's probably more like a 260s hitter kind of guy. I think he's one of those guys who's sort of a boring, semi-useful outfielder in deeper leagues. I think his power's okay. He'll get counting stats because he's in a good lineup, and he'll be out there in left field all of the time because of his glove. So he's going to get playing time because he's a great fielder, and you need a great left fielder in Camden Yards, especially with that giant left field. So he'll be out there. He'll get the counting stats because he'll be in the middle-ish of the lineup. The power's not going to be incredible, but there's some use. Yeah, I don't think he is going to be, first half off Austin Hayes. I'd love to see that. But I think he's probably more of like 260s guy who hits 15, maybe close to 20 home runs, and gets halfway decent RBI run numbers. There's use for that in certain leagues. If you're in like a 12-team league, I don't know. He might be a guy where he heats up and you pick him up for a couple weeks and then, drop him or whatever. But yeah, in your standard and shallower leagues, I don't see much use for him.
Yeah, I'm kind of there with you. His ADP is past 300. He's one of those fill-in type of outfielders at the end of your draft champions type of thing. Standard, regular 12-team league. He might get his way there. He might be like a back-end guy, but he's not somebody that's going to be like a huge draft target of mine or anything.
Yeah.
Moving on to number 6. Still, actually, this one is probably the one where I am the most confused as to what to expect out of this guy. It's Cedric Mullins. Cedric Mullins had the worst year of his career. Now, he dealt with a bunch of injuries. He was only out there for 116 games, but the batting average came down. We weren't seeing him steal quite as much. The power was very good, 15 homers in 116 games, but it was a disappointing season. He was one of the guys that you had to pay like a top 50 or so price on last year, and he was a fantasy bust. He was a bust, injury related or otherwise. Yeah. He did not live up to that expectation. It's not necessarily his fault, but are you thinking that we can see Mullins return to that 2021 form where he was a 30-30 player? He was 290 hitter, MVP candidate. Is that still there, or was that just a very lucky season for Mullins that we shouldn't be expecting again?
Yeah, I would love to see him come back to his 2021 form, but I don't see it right now. His hard contact and barrel rates have been dropping the past couple years. It's hard to say how much of last year was injury related. He was battling a groin injury for most of the season, and ended up on the IL for part of the season because of the groin injury. So, it's hard to say, could you write off all of last year for Mullins and say, hey, he was hurt, he was fighting injuries, forget it. I'm inclined to do that a little bit. I think 2022 is more possible where, a guy who hits in the 250s or 260s, 30-ish stolen bases, good number of runs, and, a little bit of pop. I think that is probably the more likely outcome than a repeat of 2021. He's another guy who's going to be out there largely because of his glove too. Mm-hmm. He's a great center fielder. And so they will put him out there. So hopefully he stays healthy. That's really the main key.
So roughly 140 right now on ADP. It's like 9th round in a 15-teamer. Do you think he's able to live up to that kind of draft price?
Definitely possible. Because I think the steals can and will be there. If you're fighting a groin injury, you're not going to steal a ton of bases. So if he's fully healthy, I could see him doing 30 to 35 steals again. And if he hits 250 while stealing 30 to 35 bases and hits 15 home runs, that's extremely useful. Yeah, that's super useful. So I think it's doable, but it's just you got to watch him this spring, see how healthy he is, see how he's doing.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I think I'll buy back in just because he's one of those boring guys. I think people are. He's not really boring, but I think people are viewing him as boring, not going until round 10, and people are more inclined to believe what he's done lately is the real version, and he's probably not, like you said, going to get back to a 30-30 season, batting close to 300. But if he's giving you 15 and 35 with 250, 260, playing every day, it's hard to fault that. Getting a later outfielder with stolen bases, I think there's a lot of value in that. And their upside is, though, he returns to the top of the order potentially. I don't think he's necessarily stuck in the 6 hole. He could, run into a lot more RBIs or especially specifically runs if he does move up to the top of the order, which is something that I think is probably, maybe not likely, but definitely possible that he's batting 1 or 2 and they have, Mullins and then Henderson and then Rutschman, or Rutschman then Henderson, or something like that. Do you think that's possible? Likely? Where would you put that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely possible. If he has a good showing in the spring and kind of looks like his old self, he's healthy, I think he has the makings of a very good leadoff hitter. And then you can have someone like Gunnar, maybe third, because he's got a bit more pop. And, Adley has pop too. So you could argue, Gunnar's faster, so maybe put Gunnar second. But yeah, I can see that. And then you get, I think Mullins could be one of those guys where, like, you're drafting and you're like, oh crap, I forgot stolen bases. Yeah. And then Cedric Mullins is out there later in the draft. You're like, oh sure, I'll grab him. And, he could steal a good number of bases for you. So it's just one of those stories you're going to have to watch over the spring just to see how healthy he is. If he's still fighting an injury, or, there's reports that he's not 100%, then I think you avoid him.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. That's totally fair. Moving on to number 7, projected as number 7, but I'm not sure I totally buy that. This guy batted predominantly 3rd and 4th in the order last year when he was out there, and he did miss some time with injuries. That is Ryan Mountcastle. Gave you 18 homers in 115 games. He batted 270, which was the highest we've seen from him outside of 2020, which is hard to really count. But on a per game basis, he was very good. As a Blue Jay fan, I know all too well the powers of Ryan Mountcastle, because every time he faces us, he just absolutely destroys us. So, I've seen that. You've seen that, how the power can really play. He's got a 30 home run season under his belt. Where are you at right now on Mountcastle? You have any interest this year?
Yeah, for sure. I think, he missed, like you said, he missed some time last year. He had a shoulder injury, which I think could explain a few things. One of the things I always try to remember is when a guy gets injured, it's not always like he got injured and immediately went on the IL. Like, usually there's an injury, you try to play through it or something like that. And so I could see, Mountcastle dealing with a shoulder problem, trying to play through it. And then, that kind of explains, some of the drop in power and stuff. I think, he's making good decisions at the plate. His PLV swing aggression metric was way above MLB average. So he's not overly aggressive at the plate. He's got solid power, solid contact ability. That's all you want in a hitter. I could see the power numbers coming up a little bit. Some kind of mix of 2021 to 2020, like those 3 seasons. So like a guy who hits in the 260s, 25 to 30 home runs, good counting stats. One of the big concerns that people had with him is, when Camden Yards moved the wall back, well, Ryan Mountcastle, he's a power guy and he's a right-handed hitter. This is going to kill him. And the Great Wall of Camden only stole 2 home runs from him last year, by my count. So that's not really affecting him. So I think you're going to see a little mix of what he's done in the past, and I think he can absolutely be a very solid contributor for your fantasy team.
I think he's really sneaky, to be honest. I think, looking at that projection of batting 7th, I think he's a lot more likely to bat cleanup than O'Hearn is most of the time anyway. Sure, I think the skill is more there. If he plays a full season, which I think there's a good chance he gets to like 130, 140, you're getting 25 homers. You're getting like 70 runs, 70 RBIs in that kind of range. He's not going to pick 237 on average. He's an afterthought.
Wow, that's surprising. That's actually surprising to me.
It's very surprising. Yeah. Just looking at this is since the start of December, and this is just draft champions, but the minimum pick of 211, maximum of 278 over 23 drafts. People are kind of forgetting about him. First base only, but first base is not a terribly deep position. You get past you get outside of those top, 10 or 12 names. There are some guys I like later on, Pasquantino and your Yandy Diaz's and Torkelsons and whatnot. Yeah. But those guys are all like 100. The guys I just mentioned are like 100 picks more expensive than Mountcastle. And if he's able to bat what the projections are thinking, 260 with 24 homers, 4 stolen bases, like 80 RBI, and that's projecting right now based on him batting in the 7th hole, I think. And I don't really see that. As much as I trust roster resource and Jason does a really good job, I think that there's something that's being missed there. I think that Mountcastle is going to get more at-bats, more plate appearances, and I think that this is kind of on the low end of the projection, and especially the ADP. It just makes me want to take him on every single team at that point. Past pick 200, I don't think you can go wrong with Mountcastle as long as he's able to stay relatively healthy. I'm going to have him on every team at that point. I mean, it's just
if that's where he's being picked, then absolutely. I mean, that's awesome.
It's just
I would do that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's have some fun. Let's talk about Jackson Holliday, who is projected to be the opening day shortstop. First of all, do you think that he will be the opening day shortstop? Is that what's going to happen here?
I think it's possible. I think he'll get a shot. I mean, the Orioles have shown they don't mind calling up a guy who's like 20 years old. They did it with Gunnar. I think he'll get a shot at the opening day roster, but unless he just rakes in spring training, which is possible. I mean, he raked at all levels of the minors last year. So unless he totally rakes in spring training, I think it kind of ends up being a similar situation that Adley was in, where he starts off the year at AAA, destroys AAA for like a month, and then comes up in like May or something like that. So it's like I said, I think it's possible he becomes a starting shortstop. I mean, the Orioles are in win now mode, and if they believe that Jackson Holliday can help them win a World Series this year, then they're going to bring him up. They don't have any reason not to. Mike Elias tends to like bringing up guys and keeping them up. Like he wants to bring up a prospect if they are major league ready and they're not going back down. He doesn't like doing the shuffle back and forth. Like, let's give him a few at bats, and then that's not what he's interested in. Jackson Holliday, for all intents and purposes, looks major league ready based on what he did last year. He was awesome. So if he does that again in spring training, I think he makes the opening day roster. But I mean, that's a big if. He's still only 20 years old, so he could easily struggle. If you draft him, you're definitely taking a risk that he struggles in spring training, or hopefully you'll not be drafting. Hopefully you'll know he's struggling in spring training before you draft, but you do take the risk that he doesn't make the opening day roster. He struggles in like AAA, and then all of a sudden, like, well, maybe he needs a little bit longer or something like that. I don't know. It's possible. I hope not. I hope he's, the second coming of Christ, like everyone seems to think he is. I would love that as an Orioles fan, and having him and Gunnar next to each other would be magic. So we'll see. It's interesting. I love roster resources optimism. That would be super fun to have Jackson Holliday at shortstop for opening day. That would be really, really fun.
He's projected for 126 games, and that's kind of the timeline that you're thinking, right? If he doesn't come up in the first month of the season, comes up, somewhere early May, that's probably right. And I think they're selling him a little short here. They're projecting 9 homers, 7 steals, and a 255. I don't know where exactly, but it just feels a little bit light. And maybe that's just because, like you said, he's been viewed as the second coming here. I don't know. I feel like he's probably going to be able to get more stolen bases than just 7 if he plays 126 games. I feel like single-digit homers that would be if he struggles. Like, I feel like this projection is probably not giving him enough benefit of the doubt. And I think that's generally what you'll see with rookie/prospect projections. They're more on the conservative side. But it's hard not to see Jackson Holliday, if he is able to earn a spot, and like you said, like he's going to have to rake to earn that spot, most likely. If he's doing that and raking and getting there, on a hot streak, it's hard to see him failing to meet double-digit homers and steals, especially over 125, 130 games. I think that they're selling him a little short there.
Especially steals. Steals.
Yeah, single-digit steals is probably not what's going to happen.
He stole 21. He stole 21 bases in the minors last year.
And that wasn't even that many games, I think, really. It's like 110, 120 games.
Exactly. Yeah, I think they'll let him run. I mean, I can understand the perspective of like, he's 20 years old, the power's maybe not there yet, or the power will take time to develop, whatever. Sure, I can understand that argument. The speed is there. The speed's not going to take time to develop, and the Orioles have shown they're not shy to steal bases. I mean, you've got Jorge Mateo and Cedric Mullins have both turned in 30, 40, or 35-ish steal seasons. So if Holliday's there and he is able to get on base, I have no reason to believe they won't let him steal bases as much as he wants.
Yeah, and with only Jorge Mateo really necessarily standing in his way of a starting role at this point, I don't know that it'll take that long. I think Mateo's really good defensively, but overall, Mateo is not a great player. If you look last year, 67 WRC plus. Is that who they're really going to want to be trotting out?
Well, what I could see happening is that the Orioles have a glut of middle infield prospects. I mean, there's Joey Ortiz, who looked great in the minors. They've got Jordan Westberg. They've got Connor Norby. Norby's learning the outfield, so maybe he's an outfielder. I think it's also very possible that any of Ortiz, Westberg, Norby are trade chips because of all the middle infield prospects they have, because you only have Gunnar's staying at third or short, and then Jackson Holliday will be at short at some point. So then really you're like, who's your second baseman? And you've got 3 or 4 people who can be your second baseman. Wouldn't shock me if one of those guys ends up being traded. But I could see a scenario where Holliday struggles in spring training, and then someone like Joey Ortiz plays second base, or Jordan Westberg or something like that. And then, if Holliday rakes a AAA, then, he comes up and one of those guys goes down, or, who knows? They have a lot of flexibility. So if they want to have Holliday stay in the minors, they don't necessarily have to go with Mateo. I think Mateo has some value for the Orioles. He's a great fielder.
Yeah.
So that helps. He's a great base runner, sometimes a little too aggressive, but luckily he can his speed overcomes his aggressiveness sometimes. But there is some utility there where he can just sit in the 9-hole and deal with that. But I think there's definitely a path for Holliday to start. There's also definitely a path for him not to. I think the most likely outcome, in my opinion, is probably an Adley situation. Like, he's down for a month and then comes up in May.
I did a draft in Arizona at First Pitch Arizona, and I drafted Holliday as my starting shortstop. I don't know how I feel about it, but I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that it'll be pretty. I got him outside of the top 200 picks, and I figured I'd take a chance. I can probably fill in some guys in April if I really need to. It's a DC, so there will be guys that I can fill in. But definitely hoping that he is able to come up and, by all reports, he's going to blow past his father in terms of production, and his father's currently on the Hall of Fame ballot. So
that would be pretty.
Yeah, it's looking pretty damn good. I mean, as an Oriole fan, if you're a baseball fan in general, that whole family. There was a video they posted around the holidays a little bit before, and there's another Holiday. I wasn't even aware that there was another Holiday. This guy is hitting as well as the other two. I don't know that he's been drafted or anything. I think he's only 15 or 16, but this family is serious, man. I don't know what it is.
They're insane. Yeah. And Jackson Holliday looks like he's 15. He has the youngest baby face you've ever seen. It's so funny. But I'd love to see him up. That would be super fun. Him and Gunnar together, and Adley and Ryan Mountcastle and just the whole gang. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned this guy who is projected as the number 9 hitter and as the second baseman, Jordan Westberg. Jordan Westberg, who is older than I thought. He's already going to be 25. I thought that he was 22, 23, but he's actually 25. Came up a little bit later maybe than you would have expected. He's projected as the starting second baseman heading into next year. His projections are projecting about 100 games, 11 homers, 5 steals, about a 250 clip. Does that sound about right to you, or do you think they're also selling Westberg maybe a little bit short there?
He did struggle a bit last year. I think Jordan Westberg's ceiling probably, or at least likely ceiling, is I think he could be like an Alec Boehm type with more speed, like a high average 15 to 20 home run guy. I don't think that that's likely for this year. I wouldn't draft him expecting that, but that's to say he's still young and has that talent. So, I think he'll get a shot given his age. He is 25. They got to see what they have in him. He could also be a trade chip, like I said, any of those middle infield prospects. I could also see him in a platoon situation. He hit 284 against lefties last year. So he's good against lefties. He struggles against righties. So maybe he's in a platoon situation at second base. him and Ramon Urias, for example, because Urias struggles against lefties more than he does against righties. So maybe they do that. I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities, but given all the middle infield prospects they have, if Westberg is really bringing the team down, I don't think he's going to stay there because, like I said, they want to win. And if Joey Ortiz is crushing AAA and Jordan Westberg is hitting 220, then Joey Ortiz is going to be in there, or Connor Norby, or whoever, one of those guys. Or maybe Jackson Holliday is playing second instead of short. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So, he has potential for fantasy purposes. Unless you're in a dynasty league, I don't think he's worth paying attention to.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. It's just honestly shocking going through this team and just looking at Fangraphs, like the amount of prospects that they have that still haven't even
ridiculous.
Come up. There's Mayo. We didn't even mention Mayo.
Yep.
We didn't mention
Kobe Mayo. Probably not up this year, I don't think. Or maybe, I don't know. He's still pretty young. But there's another infielder. I mean, he's only third base at this point. There's talk about moving him to the outfield. He's got a killer arm. But, I mean, even then, you've got Colton Cowser, you've got Heston Kierstad, Hudson Haskin, I guess, all kinds of outfielders and infielders, more infielders than outfielders. But, they have a whole ton of prospects, which is why, people are expecting them to trade for someone like Dylan Cease, though it sounds like the White Sox want the world and a little bit extra for Cease. They want Jackson Holliday, which is nuts. Yeah, I know. It's insane. And I just, especially for Cease, after the year he had last year, like I cannot imagine giving up Jackson Holliday for Cease. But so, or they could trade for Corbin Burns or something like that. There's a lot of options they have because of all these prospects they have.
It's hard to see them not making a trade because just based on the minor league depth, they're not all going to pan out. But, a year or two from now, they're going to be fielding a 9-man roster of guys who were like a year of service time, 2 years of service time. Is that realistic? I don't know. I think they're probably going to make a couple trades, whether it's Kierstad, whether it's Mayo, Norby. You can pick and choose. There's like 20 different guys you can pick and choose that are all like top 50 prospects.
Oh, there's Samuel Basallo. I forgot about him.
I mean, catcher, right?
He's the catcher. I don't think he's going to get traded. Just because I think they like him too much. He's too valuable as a hitter. But though my worry, this is just me like panic thinking. My worry is that they go like, well, we've got Samuel Basallo. We don't need to sign Adley Rutschman to a big long-term contract. That's like, there's no reason, no like evidence to believe that would happen. That's just my panic mind of like being a cynical baseball fan. But yeah. We'll see. But I mean, yeah, like you said, tons of prospects. They have so much they can use.
Yeah, I expect there'll be some kind of trade for, I would imagine, a pitcher, but they're in a pretty decent spot, honestly, at the top end of their rotation, specifically with Kyle Bradish. Kyle Bradish will move into the rotation here. I wasn't really aware of this, honestly, until it was pointed out. It was tweeted earlier today or yesterday, by the time you guys are listening, by Michael Simeone, and it was Stuff Plus. And Kyle Bradish had better Stuff Plus numbers than Spencer Strider and Garrett Cole this year. He was second only to Corbin Burns, 126 Stuff Plus. I wasn't aware. Like, I knew he was great. I wasn't aware that it was that good. 2.83 ERA. The supporting metrics are all pretty strong. He had a 3.76 SIERA. He had a 3.53 xFIP. Solid strikeout minus walk of 18.5. Is Bradish the ace? Is he the better pitcher at this point than Grayson Rodriguez? Do you think he'll get the ball on opening day? I think he probably will, but what are your thoughts?
I think he probably will. I think ultimately Grayson is the pitcher that I have a bit more faith in than Bradish. I like what Bradish did last year. He cut down on his fastball usage. His fastball is not a good fastball. He added a sinker, started using that more, started using his slider a lot. In fact, his slider was his most thrown pitch, which I love. He's pitching backwards, and I have preached forever that pitching backwards is awesome, where you throw your breakers or off-speed pitches more than you throw your fastball. So he started using his slider and curveball more. His slider is nasty. That's what's going to bring up his Stuff Plus numbers. His slider is filthy. The curveball is solid. I worry about his fastballs. His four-seamer he still throws it a good bit. It gets knocked around. Sinker's better. I honestly kind of hope he ditches the four-seamer for the most part and starts using the sinker, going for like a sinker slider approach, peppering in a curveball, and using the four-seamer just when he needs to raise the hitter's eye level or something like that. The other thing that concerns me, his four-seamer had a called strike rate in the 96th percentile of all MLB. I'd be surprised if that happens next year. I mean, pitchers or hitters, for whatever reason, were just being super patient or super non-aggressive on his four-seamer. But when they did swing at it, they crushed it. I mean, it did not have good metrics against it. So, you know, the talent is legit. I think fantasy-wise, he's probably like a top 35 pitcher. That's kind of where I'm valuing him. I don't necessarily think a sub-3 ERA is going to happen again. But I mean, you know, if he goes for more of a sinker slider curveball approach, he's got that changeup that he can throw to lefties on occasion if he needs to. The fastball gets a little better. Yeah, I can see him being really, really good. I do think he ends up the opening day pitcher, but Grayson's the guy who I think has the potential to be like a top 15, top 10 starter this year.
Grayson's more expensive than Bradish, but Bradish is still a top 100 pick. 91 is the ADP over the last month. It sounds like, based on what you said, SP 35, that you'd be out at that point.
Yeah, I think he's in the top 35. I don't know if he's necessarily at 35, but I think he's, you know, in that range of like 30 to 35. Yeah, that's a bit high. You know, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'd take him there. I have some concerns. Just there are guys who can overcome a bad fastball with great breaking stuff. I mean, Carlos Carrasco made a whole career out of having a trash fastball. But Bradish has an incredible slider. Everything else is good. Like, he has a good curveball. It's not incredible. Someone like Carrasco, for example, had two incredible breaking pitches in his changeup and slider. So it's hard to overcome a bad fastball. I'm not someone who's like, you got to have your fastball as your most thrown pitch or whatever. But if you have a bad one, it's going to get hit and it's going to be a problem. So if he goes for like heavy sinker usage and that sinker's good, and it was pretty good last year, then yeah, I can see maybe justifying that price. But I got to see what he's doing in spring training, honestly, see if he's tweaking the approach at all again. Oh, you're muted.
Professional at work here, talking muted on the mic as I do every now and again. Apologies there. Now, I think that he's a little too expensive for me. He's the 41st pitcher in total off the board, including relievers. I wish there was a way on NFBC to sort through relievers and starters, because you got to do it manually. But I think it's a little too pricey for me as well. It's not really the range where I want to be shopping. I think you could get behind him once or twice. If you're like a volume drafter, you take Bradish once or twice here and there. If you're like a guy who plays in one league, spending a top 100 pick on him as like your second or third SP, I think it's a little bit too risky for me. If you just go farther down the board, you'll find those names like a Dylan Cease, a Sonny Gray, Jordan Montgomery, Chris Bassett. There's not as like, those guys are not going to have sub-3 ERAs, but I think they have a much higher floor than Bradish. Personally, I don't think that Bradish is going to be bad. The projections think he'll have a 3.86 ERA, which would be very good. I just don't know if I want to spend the top 100 pick on him. Now,
I think 3.86 ERA is probably a little more pessimistic than I would be, but I could see him as mid threes rather than high threes. But
they tend to be more conservative projections. Steamer, you know, you're generally getting like they say it's like a 50th percentile outcome, generally speaking. So I could see him going to like a 3.4, 3.5 ERA. That wall that they've moved back, which does hurt the hitters, of course, it just benefits the pitchers a little bit. So something else to factor in there with your Orioles evals. Now, let's talk Grayson. I was really, really into Grayson last year. He was my most drafted, most rostered player. And in the first half of the season, he gave us a 7.35 ERA. He probably exited many of your fantasy teams at the midpoint of the season. Hard to blame you. Second half, 76 2/3 of a 2.58 ERA. He obviously was night and day in the first half and the second half. I think that he's probably just going to continue to build on what he did, with also the caveat that prospect growth isn't necessarily linear. It's not just going to be better every single year. But I think based on what we saw in the second half, we saw him turn into that ace that people were generally expecting. And I think that I would probably be paying a top 100 price for Grayson, more so than I would for Kyle Bradish. Is that fair?
Oh, for sure. I mean, without a doubt. I love what he did when he came back from the minors. He was locating his fastball really well, keeping it around 98 miles an hour, throwing it for strikes 70% of the time. I mean, you want to talk about a guy whose stuff is legit. The fastball is great. Slider, changeup, and curveball are all rock solid. I think he has the stuff to be an ace. I know right after the season ended, Nick did his way too early top 200 rankings. He had Grayson like I think 12 as a 12th starting pitcher, and honestly, I'm fine with that. I mean, I think he absolutely has the potential to be a top 10 starting pitcher. I really do. He has the stuff to be an ace, and as long as he can continue to locate it well, which it looks like he did once he came back from the minors, I think that absolutely he could be awesome. We've heard for years how incredible Grayson Rodriguez is, and we finally got to see it, and I have no reason to believe he's not going to keep it up. I mean, obviously there's the potential for him to bomb, but I think the stuff is legit, and if he keeps doing what he was doing, he's awesome.
Some people read more into projections than others. I tend to buy what they're telling you in terms of rate stats. If you look at what Steamer projected last year, they were pretty damn accurate projecting regression for guys like Urias and Manoah. I find it to be pretty trustworthy. And what they're projecting, and again, that's like a 50th percentile projection, is a 3.6 ERA. That's pretty damn excellent to go along with 18% strikeout minus walk rate. I think that I'm willing to take him, maybe not as my number one starting pitcher, but as a number two, I think I'd be very, very confident. And even as a number one in a certain build, if you start with like 4 or 5 hitters and you go with Grayson as your number one, I think you could do a lot worse. I think that he's definitely, like you said, and like Nick said, potentially an SP1 this year, a top 12 starting pitcher. And I think that you can be drafting him with confidence heading into this year. It's expensive, but I think it is generally worth it.
Yeah, I do wonder if you're going to have to pay in most leagues. If you're going to have to pay first, like, top 10 pitcher, top 15 pitcher price for him. Like, I think, probably not. I think in your casual baseball leagues, you're going to get guys who look at him and be like, he was really bad to start the year. And, I think he did pretty good. And then they're not going to draft him as a top 15 pitcher. So, I would feel good with him as my number 2 pitcher, but I don't know that I'm necessarily have to pay for him to be my number 2 pitcher. So I think that's possible. I think expert leagues, people who pay attention leagues like NFBC, you're going to have to pay a premium because I think the fantasy world knows and is in on him. But in your like casual friendly fantasy baseball league, I think there's going to be plenty of leagues where he's going to fall in drafts and you're going to be able to get him for value.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. Most people don't listen to fantasy baseball podcasts. Most people are not going through fan graphs in the middle of the night trying to figure out what scenario is. Most guys I know from my own experience in my home league with the guys I went to high school with, they know a couple things. They know baseball better than they know fantasy baseball. You start talking BABIP and you start talking StatCast stuff, they kind of zone out. And I think a lot of people's leagues are generally like that. There's a couple of very sharp people, but in your average $50, $100 buy-in college, high school league, Grayson Rodriguez is going to be somebody that's probably – he's not going to be forgotten about. But to your point, I think that people in the NFBC leagues, if you're talking like tout wars and labor in those industry leagues, are going to push him up and up and up because that's kind of just what this industry does, generally speaking. Young guy, a lot of hype, got better in the second half, boom. Like he's like look at Tariq Skubal, right? He's a top 50 pick, and that's kind of what you're going to see. And not that we're talking Tigers, but Skubal's probably the same thing. In your home leagues, he'll be going a lot later than he would be in like an NFBC style league. So definitely something to keep in mind there. Let's talk about John Means. John Means business. I mean, I loved this guy when he was out there a couple of years ago. It was 2021. He had the great year. I believe that was the year he threw the no-hitter. He had a 3.62 ERA. Yeah. Great start. Great stuff for the whole year, really. And these last 2 seasons combined, we've got 31 2/3 out of him. Now, when he was back this year, over those 23 2/3 this season, it was a 2.66 ERA. The supporting metrics do not tell the same story necessarily. He wasn't striking anybody out, but results-wise, he was very good when he came back this year. Can John Gray get back to that kind of peak John Gray that we saw in 2021?
John Means.
Did I say John Gray?
You did say John Gray. That's
I
fine.
don't know when you're looking at players all day. That's what I'm talking about. I'm just a degenerate here looking at player pages all day. And I was looking at John Gray earlier, so forgive me.
All the Johns, they all look the same. Yeah, no, I think I love Means. I loved seeing him come back. His fastball was sitting around like 91, 92. Don't super love that. A couple years ago, it was sitting, 94, and I liked that a lot more. He's someone I'm going to be paying attention to in spring training. His velo improving on the fastball, how healthy is he, all that stuff. He's never been a huge strikeout guy. Obviously, in the limited action last year, he was like the opposite of a strikeout guy, like an 11.4% strikeout rate. So, but I think without the strikeout upside, he's what we at PitcherList call a Toby. So he's a guy who shows up to work every day and is pretty boring, but like good enough or high enough floor to like be worth having on your team, but you're not super excited about having him on your team. And when he goes against, really hot hitting teams, maybe you bench him. So, unless I see something really different from him, he's useful, I think, to have on teams, but he's not going to light things up.
Yeah, you're not coming from a place where he was striking out a lot of batters before the injury. I don't really see him getting anywhere near there. The price is not bad, $273. I can get behind it.
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't love it. I don't see that and think I need to have him on every team. I think it's fine. I think that maybe he can get back to what he once was, but the projections, again, I know I'm talking about them a lot, but they're going for a 4.42 ERA with a 18% strikeout rate. Fantasy-wise, I don't know that that's really going to move the needle for you so much, even though the cost is not so high. If he's able to get back to 2021, sure, but I just don't think it's terribly likely we do see him reach those heights again.
Yeah, I think watch him in spring training. If he shows up in spring training and he's like pumping 94 on his fastball, then all of a sudden I'm very interested in what's going on. That's entirely possible. I mean, guys coming back from Tommy John often will see their velocity bump up. Maybe it doesn't happen, but I am very interested to see what a finally fully healthy John Means looks like. And I'm hopeful we get a fully healthy John Means rather than a still recovering John Means.
Yeah, absolutely. When he's out there, he is a fun pitcher to watch. He's not going to be, exciting pitcher necessarily, but there is something that is nice to watch about John Means from the left side. The back half of this rotation for me is very confusing right now. Dean Kramer, I think, is going to have a spot. Cole Irvin's slotted in as the number 5, but then you got Tyler Wells also hanging around, and Tyler Wells was excellent in the first half last season. Do you think that this is correct, that it'll be Kramer as the 4 guy, Irvin as the 5 guy, and then Wells as kind of like a bullpen guy, or do you think that Wells finds his way into the rotation?
It's hard to say. The way the Orioles handle Tyler Wells is endlessly frustrating. Yes. He's a great pitcher, friend of the site. I think, I don't know how you put Cole Irvin in the 5th spot instead of Tyler Wells. I don't know. I don't see how that makes any sense. Dean Kramer, I think, has a spot, and we're saying all of this assuming they do not trade for a starting pitcher.
Yeah.
If they trade for a starting pitcher, if they trade for a starting pitcher, all of a sudden, then who's their 5 spot? Is it Kramer or is it Wells? And I think if the battle's between Kramer and Wells, I think Kramer ends up winning that because they've put Wells in the bullpen before. I could see the argument where the Orioles are like, look, we don't have Bautista this year. Yeah, we signed Kimbrel. We've got Cano, but we really need to make sure our bullpen's rock solid, and Tyler Wells is very good, so we'll use him to shore up the bullpen. I don't know. I don't like that, but I think Wells has the potential to definitely make the rotation. I think he should make the rotation. But, we'll see. It's someone to watch. You got to pay attention to what he's doing, see what the reports say. I'm sure, I guarantee Mike Elias and Brandon Hyde are going to be asked during spring training, hey, what are you going to do with Tyler Wells? Is Tyler Wells going to be in the bullpen? What's the rotation going to look like? They're going to have a response. So I think you're going to have a pretty good idea by the time you're drafting what the Tyler Wells situation will look like. I'm hopeful that you will.
It was super frustrating.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
Super frustrating. Yeah. No. You're absolutely right. It was super frustrating. If he's in the rotation, I think he's worth drafting. They might pull him early. They seem to be afraid to let him go like 6 or 7 innings. But maybe he's a guy who's going 5 innings most of the time. But, he's got strikeout upside. ERA should be solid. So just pay attention to him. That's all.
Yeah, in the second half of the season, he didn't really get a chance. Like coming out of the All-Star break, he faced the Dodgers, he faced Tampa, and he faced the Yankees. He had 3 bad starts, and they sent him down. I thought it was way premature. I thought they should have kept him around in the rotation for longer. He was one of the best arms in terms of whip. He had a sub-1 whip. And in this day and age, a sub-1 whip, you can count on the fingers of one hand how many pitchers are giving you a sub-1 whip. And, it's not everything, but he had a 3.64 ERA. The strikeouts are very solid at 25%. He should be in the rotation over Cole Irvin. If there is any,
for sure.
If they go with Irvin, I could see it being like, we want another lefty or, something to do with spring training. But realistically speaking, I think Wells is the guy. I think that they didn't treat him the way they should have last year. I just think it's really awful that he got sent down because he had a bad start against the Dodgers and then against Tampa. I think that they were just really unfair, and he should be given a chance in the rotation. Whether or not he is a whole different question. But I think I could probably get behind taking a chance on him. Now, out of those 3 pitchers we mentioned, he's the most expensive in drafts. $331 for Wells, $333 for Kramer, and you're getting Irvin at $681. So if there is a reason to want to take Cole Irvin, it's just the fact that he's free. But I don't think that he should be the guy. He had a good stretch with Oakland a couple years ago, but he's not great.
He's really not good. He's a command guy who doesn't have a high strikeout rate. I could also see, and I'm really curious what the Orioles are going to do. DL Hall is in the bullpen. I don't know if the Orioles are resigned to saying DL Hall is a bullpen guy like forever. Like he's not going to be a starter. Maybe they are. I don't know. And I could see the argument that he is a bullpen guy. He's got really good stuff, and he can't control it to save his life. That's more workable in a bullpen than it is in a starting rotation. But he's getting to the age where like the Orioles need to figure out what he is. And if he's not a bullpen guy, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, maybe he's in that spot in the rotation. I don't know. I have a feeling he ends up a bullpen guy just based on what they've been doing with him and based on, his stuff. But he's also someone to remember that he exists. And, I think honestly, Cole Irvin's the odd guy out. I don't know why they would want him in the starting rotation at all when you have all these other options.
Yeah, I hope that he's not there for fantasy purposes. If you did want to take a chance at pick 680 and take Cole Irvin, it's not going to hurt you at that point. Maybe he is the starter, and maybe you luck into 20 or so starts, but it really shouldn't be him, all things considered. The last piece of the puzzle here is the bullpen, and they brought in Craig Kimbrell. There are some people who think, it's going to be Cano still. It's going to be Cano. Kimbrell's been the closer every stop of his career. I don't see them bringing in Kimbrell, and it was not a ton of money from what I remember. What was it? $13 million for 1 year?
Yeah, it was 1 year deal, yeah.
I think that it would be hard to see a situation where he's not the closer to start the year. Maybe he loses the job. Maybe, he's at the point where he's 35, almost 36, and maybe he falls off a bit. But they're up 3-2 on opening day. It's the 9th inning. Kimbrell's
yeah, it's going to be Kimbrell. And Cano was awesome, but he struggled a bit in save situations. I say this having not looked up how he actually did in save situations, so this is all just anecdotal from what I remember of the season. But he was much better in hold situations, setup situations than he was in a save situation. And I think you don't sign Kimbrell and say, all right, well, here's our setup guy. You sign Kimbrell to be your closer. And that's what he's been doing. That's what he did last year. And Kimbrell's still got, enough in the tank, I think, to be worth having in some fantasy leagues. I mean, the Orioles are going to have save situations. They're going to win plenty of games, I hope. And they're going to be putting themselves in save situations. And I don't think he's going to be threatened for the role. I don't think Cano is going to take over the job. I think Cano is going to be a setup guy like he was for Bautista and like he excelled as for Bautista. And Kimbrell's just going to fill in as closer for this year until Bautista's back the following year.
Yeah, I completely agree. Kimbrell does not go anywhere without being the closer. It's been the way it's always been for 15 years now. When he's been tried as a setup man, I think there was a time when he was with the White Sox and he was setting up Liam Hendricks for a while and it didn't work out well. he is a guy that, he thrives in the ninth inning. He's not, I'm not going to say he's a lock Hall of Fame closer because we've seen what Billy Wagner's going through, but one of the better closers in history. He's got more than 400 saves. It's hard to imagine him ending his career as the 7th or 8th inning guy in Baltimore. I think he will be the dude this year. And he's one of those closers that's going outside of the top 100. And there's not so many of those guys that I think are secured everyday closers that you can get at that price. So I actually think Kimbrel is probably a good value as long as he doesn't keep getting pushed up too much. Also want to just, sing a sad song for those who drafted Yennier Cano in the top 100 early on in drafts or somewhere in that range, because that's looking not so great right now, of course. But who knows what happens? Yeah. Kimbrel's an older guy. Cano would be the guy that they turn to if Kimbrel gets hurt or something. I think he would be
for sure. Yeah, if Kimbrel's hurt, and that's definitely a possibility. Kimbrel's an old man. An old man. I say that as I'm 33. He's like 3 years older than me. Kimbrel is elderly for baseball, and if he's out, Yennier Cano is absolutely going to be the guy. I don't know who else they would put in that spot. I mean, Danny Coulomb. I don't know, but I think for fantasy purposes, Kimbrel's useful. I think Kimbrel could get you 25 to 30 saves, and ERA is probably going to be like mid threes. He's going to get strikeouts. He always does. So he's not an elite closer. He's no Felix Bautista, but he will absolutely be useful. And if you can get him for cheap or basically free, I think there are lots of closers where you're like, does this guy have the job? Or was it going to be a closer by committee? I don't think you really have to worry about that in Baltimore.
Yeah, I am totally there with you. He's no longer the Braves Kimbrel of giving you like a 1.1 ERA, but a 3-something ERA with the potential for a sub-3 season still in the cards with 25 to 30 saves. I think you're taking that a lot after pick 100 and being pretty happy with it. But I think that's pretty much it, Ben. I think we've covered the Orioles in depth here from top to bottom. I don't think we've missed anybody. Have we missed anybody? I think we've got pretty much all the bases covered. There's so many prospects.
Yeah, I think. Oh, that's the only thing I was going to say is like pay attention to the prospect. I will say, we kind of glossed over him. Dean Kremer is also someone to kind of pay attention to. He has the potential to be a decent fantasy asset. He's got a great cutter, pretty good fastball. Everything else is kind of eh. So he's someone to watch in spring training. If some of those secondary pitches can become better, he's got the foundation of the cutter and fastball to work with. So if all of a sudden his curveball or changeup turn into good strikeout pitches, he's someone to pay attention to, I think. But aside from that, just watch all the prospects. Like I said, we mentioned Kauser, Kierstad, Ortiz, those types. Pay attention to them, Mayo even maybe. And if they come up, they're talent. They're all talented guys. They're worth keeping an eye on. I wouldn't say draft any of them outside of maybe Holliday, but definitely keep an eye on them.
Yeah, see how playing time shakes out in spring training and see if it's, the manager's tipping his hand one way or another. And you might be able to get yourself a little discount, especially like we mentioned in those home leagues where people don't tend to pay as much attention. You can scoop up some value there. Ben, I really appreciate you coming on, though. I had a great time today meeting you. We've met before. We were on Govier's panel last year.
We were. That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, we were.
What was it? He calls it like the Bozo
Fest.
Bozo Fest. That's what it was. We were on there with Mason and Greg Jewett, I think, for a while.
Yeah,
probably do that again. But good to actually properly meet you here, talk one-on-one, and talk about what is probably alternates between your favorite and least favorite subject. I know the Blue Jays do for me, and that's kind of how it goes for a lot of these teams. But Ben, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Yeah, I just want to let you get out one more time, everything you got going on at PitcherList and where people can find your work.
Yeah, just at PitcherList.com or BaltimoreSportsAndLife.com if you want some Orioles stuff. I'm at Ben J. Palmer on Twitter. And like I said, next few weeks I'm going to be putting out my pitch review series. I'm also working on a follow-up to my Breaking Balls article from like 3 years ago. I wrote an article about, how we should think about breaking balls, and I'm looking at updating it and seeing, how hitters are, if hitter trends are the same or if they've changed. So keep an eye out for that at some point. But
make sure you're checking out all of Ben's work. You can find him on Twitter at Ben J. Palmer. If you want to check out what I got going on, it's Joe Orico 99 there. If you're watching on YouTube, appreciate it. Just go look at the number or the names you see on screen there. Pop in a follow. If you're listening to the podcast feed, then go over to Twitter and check us out. Go check out PitcherList.com. And, of course, Sports Ethos, where you can get all of our stuff right from the source. But we'll leave you there. If you're listening on the day of recording, then go check out our live Gladiator draft that we're doing Wednesday night. It'll be out as a podcast tomorrow. But until then, guys, take care. Have a great night. We'll see you then.